Good morning, everybody. I believe people are beginning to join us now. We just have a few seconds to go before our official start time. I'm Bernadette Holmes. I'm Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and I'll be welcoming you officially, formally, as it hits 11:45. People beginning to use the chat. Let's have a little look. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Bernadette Holmes. I'm Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar and also to the Language Show. Thank you very much for joining us. I have with me some very distinguished speakers, very inspirational speakers. And as you know from the program that you've seen, we are tackling a very serious question. And that question is how languages can save lives and help to build a better future. I think we would all agree that at the current time, the world is a very fractured place. And it's easy to say, isn't it, in terms of rhetoric, well, speak other languages, understand other cultures, and that's going to find all of the solutions. Well, we're realists. That isn't going to find all of the solutions, but it is going to play a very valuable part. And I'm delighted to welcome people who really know firsthand the value of languages and cultural knowledge, because they use their language skills and their cultural agility in their daily lives and make a difference. Now, those people that I have with me, if I look at the side there, and as you see people, I have Professor Antonella Sirachi joining us from Madrid. Antonella is founder of Bilingualism Matters. She is a professor of developmental linguistics based in the University of Edinburgh. And I'm delighted to have Antonella with us. She's been with us for several years and I work very closely with her. And she'll be explaining all of the things that we are hearing from our other speakers in terms of what research tells us about languages and plurilingualism. I'm welcoming also John Warne, who is the CEO of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. John is an exceptional person in many respects, and he will be moderating for us our panel and also adding, obviously, to his answers and expertise to the chat and to the question and answer sessions. You will see we have space for question and answers as well. I'm also welcoming George Wilson, and he is from the British Council in Paris. He's going to be talking about regional and minority languages, very interesting in this ecology of languages. All languages matter. I'm also welcoming Major Martin Beaver from the MOD, from DRACL. And we'll be saying a little bit more about how he uses languages and how our services use languages. But first and foremost, I am delighted to welcome colleagues from the UK intelligence agencies. Those of you who joined us last year will recall that we had Sir Jeremy Fleming very eloquently making the case for languages. All languages matter. Languages matter to GCHQ, and he is a great champion of languages. And this year, we are actually involving people who use languages daily in their day-to-day lives, from MI5, MI6, GCHQ. Now, just for this segment, and explaining this to everybody who is joining us, we will not be seeing the faces of our colleagues. We will see a visual when they speak, but they will be highlighting their first name and the service, the agency in which they work. So we have MI5, Jatinder, GCHQ, Mo, MI6, Louisa, and from recruitment, Penny. And they will be joining us via an avatar picture. It won't be moving, so it's not a moving avatar. And they will be signaling which agency they work for. Also, in the chat throughout this segment, there will be links, information, key information and links. So please make a note of those, because this segment, only this segment, will not be available to you after the live session. All of the other people will be recorded, all of the other speakers, and you will be able to download that. But this particular segment from the UK intelligence agencies will not be available to you on post-show recording. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to go now live to, again, live, but with visuals, to Major Martin Beaver, if I may, from DRACL. Now, what is DRACL? Now, DRACL is the defence, basically, requirements for languages and culture, for culture and languages organisation for the MOD. And I'm hoping that Martin will be able to tell us a little bit more about that. Are you ready, Martin, to join us?
I am, Bernadette. Good morning, Bernadette. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this, this event today. Yes, I can talk a little bit about DRACL. As you quite rightly say, DRACL stands for the Defence Requirements Authority for Culture and Language. And we do a number of things. The first thing that we do is there are a number of posts across defence which require language training before individuals deploy or take up those posts, and we're responsible for ensuring that the language training that those individuals receive is relevant to the post and in line with the needs of the post. And we work with the Defence Centre for Defence School of Language and Culture, the DCLC, Defence Centre for Language and Culture, to deliver that training, and they deliver that training. They do it extraordinarily well. We constantly review the posts of the individuals that are going to ensure that the level of language training that those individuals are receiving is appropriate. And we talk not just to the individuals who are already in post, but we also talk to their line managers as well. And also, along with the contractor, we run a language assessment. So anybody in the armed forces can undertake a language assessment. I think there are about 30 languages we currently support, and those take place 4 times a year. Now, it's important to note that it's not just the graduates of the school, of those people who are preparing to use their language that take that, but 70% of the clientele, if you like, are individuals across the armed forces who are just enthusiastic about languages and want to be assessed so that their competence level is recorded, so that they may at some future stage be selected to use that language. So really that's what we do, and in a nutshell, that's what we do in the DRACL. Right, beg your pardon.
Thank you very, very much, Martin. That's very impressive. Can you say something about the levels that you require of language skills, of cultural understanding? How does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as I said before, we follow the NATO standard on this, and there are 4 levels that the school trains to. Level 1, which is functional; level 2, which is survival; level 3, which is professional; and level 4, which is expert. And every post that we review, we give one of those scores to the requirement. So individuals will spend a time at the school depending on the level of language training that their post requires. For example, one post might require expert training, get to level 3, so the course will be longer than another post that only requires survival training, level 1. So really that's how we categorize the language requirements, and that is then delivered by the DCLC.
What about the cultural understanding? Is that measured?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, with culture, because we take the view very much. There are cultural courses, of course, there are across the armed forces, but we take the view very much that when you learn the language, you are, by the way that you learn the language, you are learning the culture as well. Through, it may be immersion, you may go out to the country and spend a few weeks during the course there, learning a little bit about the society, being immersed in the culture. But you also, through the authentic materials that the school use, you're also, and the instructors, of course, many of whom are heritage speakers, you're learning about the culture as well. Now culture, when we talk about defence, and we might come on to this later, it is very much something that when you get into country, you learn about the culture. And there are 2 types of culture for me. There's the culture of the country itself, but there's also the military culture as well, because every armed forces has a different culture. And repeated exposure in those environments by repeat tours or going to work with those armed forces again enhances that cultural understanding. So we take the view that when you are learning the language and you're going out to these jobs, you're really on the job learning the culture as well.
This is very, very important for us, this dimension of culture, because we always emphasize that when you are teaching a language, you are also teaching the culture. It's extremely important. It's not just about decoding and encoding, it's about developing cultural competence. And that clearly matters for the MOD, doesn't it, Martin?
Oh, it's hugely important. It's hugely important. And, you know, we talk really about one of the things that we try and do is to get people to go and do repeat tours out in places so that we get these people, we get these officers who thoroughly understand, as I said before, not just the culture of the country, but the culture of the military. And that's especially important because those officers often then deploy many of the operations that we're involved in these days. I would say the majority are multinational operations. And those individuals will deploy as liaison officers. And they'll be embedded within the headquarters. And that level of military cultural understanding is absolutely crucial. And that's not something you can train. That's done by repeated exposure.
Absolutely. You describe yourself as a passionate linguist, Martin, but how did you come to be a passionate linguist? Did you start out with languages? And I understand you've used languages in peacekeeping missions all over the world.
I've been very fortunate. In fact, I wasn't a linguist at school. I was listening in awe to some of our previous speakers talking about their university experiences and school experiences. And for me, I wasn't a linguist at school. It wasn't one of the things I was interested in. In fact, I studied law at university and with initially intentions to become a lawyer, but really I wanted to be an army officer. And the reason I joined the army was nothing to do with languages. It was so that I could lead soldiers, as we all as officers join either if we want to be a naval officer, an Air Force officer, an army officer, we join to lead. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And it wasn't really until I until I was actually serving that I developed a passion for languages. And I deployed with my soldiers to Bosnia in 1995 and found myself providing radio communications into a French headquarters. And it really struck me. It really struck me. I didn't really think about it until I was thinking about preparing this, to be honest. But the liaison officers, as I watched those officers working, they were in a French headquarters. They were Italians, they were Spaniards, they were officers from a number of different nations. And they weren't only linguists, they'd obviously done this before. And the high esteem with which they were held, because not only, it goes back to what we were saying about culture before, not only were they excellent French linguists, that went without saying, but they brought something extra. They understood the context. They weren't just translators or interpreters. They were people who understood the context of the deployment. They knew how their own forces would react, and they provided that bridge, if you like, between the French and the other nations they were working with, and they were absolutely invaluable. And in those days, I was leading soldiers in there. I had a troop of soldiers, and I was very privileged to lead the Royal Signal soldiers on operations, and it was great. But I saw this role from afar, and I thought that really is something that I would like to do. And I tried to do a little bit of it. It's surprising how O-level French stretches when you need it to, and in that first tour, it certainly did.
You did receive training from the army, though, didn't you, to develop your language skills?
I did, yes. I was lucky. I went to the French Staff College for 2 years.
Right.
To the DCLC's predecessor, which was the Defence School of Languages. And I was listening to speakers talking about inspirational teachers that really pushed them in the direction of languages. And the tutors in the DCLC and the Defence School of Languages represent that for me. Because I went in there with a little bit of French knowledge, and I did the long French course, and that really inspired my love of languages, not just French, but seeing the other languages taught. And I thought, I really want to be in this business. And I remembered the liaison officers from before, and I thought, this is really what I want to do. I loved commanding soldiers, but as I get older and more experienced, I would like to move into this space.
And you have served in Bosnia, Afghanistan, Kosovo, and you've seen the value of languages in all of those contexts, in all of those arenas.
Absolutely. I outlined my experiences in Bosnia, but deploying to Afghanistan, again, working in multinational headquarters, the impact that most of the NATO operations, the framework language is generally English as they do that, because it's English or French are the NATO languages. And so you find that the languages are English, but the value to be gained from having people who speak other languages outside that, it has been immense. And it's that liaison officer, it's that exchange officer who will be able to understand what the commander really wants, and then be able to explain that to the subordinate commanders in their own language. They already understand it. I mean, our NATO partners, their officers, and I worked in Italy, have an amazing level of English. They really do, and it's superb. But there is no substitute for somebody who will be able to speak to them in their own language as well, just to confirm what the commander wants and just give a bit of context, so that they fully understand what the requirement is. And I saw that in Afghanistan. I saw that certainly in Kosovo, which was another NATO multinational operation. Just absolutely invaluable. And we were talking about saving lives, and it genuinely does. It genuinely does. If you've got somebody who can talk in the language and can explain things on the ground, then that genuinely is a life-saving capability.
Absolutely. And you're emphasizing there, Martin, aren't you, that these supercentral languages, English, that's the hypercentral language, really, French, these are the NATO languages, but all of this mix of different officers, different serving personnel with different languages, having those languages, at least two, and other languages to share and cultural knowledge, that really emphasizes the importance of cooperation facilitated by language and cultural understanding.
Oh.
I think that's really the key that we're trying to emphasize here.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the key enablers. Linguistic ability, people who could speak more than one language, 2, 3 languages, they are the enablers for these operations. They are, you can't put a price on them. And what's more, you can't just train them. You can't put them on a course and at the end of the course they're the finished article. The liaison officers I've worked with, who are British Army officers, and overseas liaison officers and exchange officers, they do numbers of different tours in numbers of different backgrounds. Their linguistic ability is not questioned. That's not the value. That's just the enabler, and that's what they do at the early stages. But they grow on that. That's the key. That's the key skill. And I think we heard before, linguistics will get you through the door, but when it comes to it. It's doing 1 or 2 or 3 tours, things like that. That's what makes the difference. That's what really is the key, I think. Hello.
Sorry, I've cut out there. I was just going to say, if you please keep posting, everybody, questions. We're coming up to question time very, very, very shortly. But Martin's just going to tell us a little bit about his teaching experience.
Yeah, I did 27 or 8 years as an army officer, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I decided, because I'm so passionate about languages, that I would retrain as a teacher. I'd retrained as a teacher, and I taught in a wonderful school in Boscombe down in Bournemouth for 3 years, teaching French and Spanish. And obviously, I used to joke at the time, aside from languages, because my other passion is the armed forces. And I think it's such a wonderful career for young people that I unashamedly promoted throughout my brief teaching career. I unashamedly promoted the armed forces to people, but I used to try and sell it through the prism of languages and say, look, I'm teaching you languages now, you can do this in the armed force. I used to talk about the DCLC and where you could learn and all of those sort of things. But teaching gave me another aspect, because of course I'd not been a teacher of languages. And so I learned how people learn languages in a more scientific way. And that was hugely beneficial. And I used to say to my students that learning a language is like learning to play the piano. If you only practice during your piano lessons, you wouldn't make much progress. And it's not about motivation. It's about self-discipline. It's about doing a little bit and often, rather than doing 2 or 3 hours every Sunday.
Very, very good.
I watched children who followed that approach, and I had a sort of hardcore who attended my French club on a Wednesday night, and they progressed amazingly. And I've left now, and I've rejoined the army as a reservist. And I hear from my former boss that one of those students has now taken over French club on a Wednesday, and he's now running French club. So
Excellent.
Good to see. But I was amazed by the ability of the students and by the application of the students in the school and the progress that they made. And I think the next generation coming through, I've got high hopes, because there are some fabulous linguists in our schools.
Excellent.
In my school, it was hugely supported by senior leadership and by United Learning, who ran the school, who are the organisation that ran the school. And I found it a wonderful time in my life, to be honest.
Thank you very, very, very much, Martin. That's absolutely sensational. Let's turn to our audience questions, if I may. And I'm going to invite John to lead us in that, if I may. John Warne. Key questions are coming through from those of us who've been posting in the chat and in the QA. John, can I hand over to you for a moment?
Yes, the first one is around imposter syndrome and the sort of feeling of self-doubt that we can all have sometimes when we're using our languages. Martin, have you ever had any feeling of imposter syndrome when you've been using your languages in your work?
Absolutely. I think when I was on that first tour, I remember speaking to a senior French officer where I was about to leave, and he was thanking me in French for everything that I'd done. And he went into a long speech, and I was nodding and smiling and understood about 10% of it. And so I certainly felt that day a little bit of an imposter. But as I went on and got more capability, and thanks to the DCLC, became more confident in my use of language, and then did 1 and then 2 and then 3 exchange officer and liaison officer jobs, I became much more self-confident. I think everybody, when they are studying a second language and using it in their work, at the start has that imposter syndrome, and they feel this is just too much for me. And I often say that to people who are going off on these posts, don't worry if you leave thinking I just don't know how I'm going to work all day in this language. Because if you apply yourself within a certain amount of time, you'll become confident, you'll understand more, and then you'll become a real asset to the organisation.
Terrific. There was one other thing which you covered, and our previous speakers covered as well, but perhaps just a word on the support that you're given with languages. Certainly, I think people who have used languages in a business context sometimes haven't had an enormous amount of support from their employers. But that's really not the case with defence and security. There's very strong support and amazing structures in place to support linguists.
Oh, I was astonished. Bearing in mind, I wasn't a linguist when I joined the armed forces. The opportunity, the opportunities I was given to when I'd established that I loved foreign languages and wanted to learn them, not just at the DCLC in my time in learning, but I also used to go on courses. We got courses. I haven't been on one for some time, so I'm not 100% up to date, but we used to go away to Bristol University for the weekend and do have language weekends, and really huge amount of support is available for you if you want to be a linguist, to be able to do that. The assessments that we take, as I said before, anybody in the armed forces can take those. The preparation for those, the past papers, anything that you need is available for you to do that. So, and we run in the DRACL, we run the Defence Languages Forum. The Defence Languages Forum is on our site. Anyone from Defence can join. There is an owner, there is a member of service personnel who runs each language forum, and they are constantly posting materials, posting advice, all the members of the forum on learning the language. So the Defence Languages Forum that we've set up is a huge endeavour, really, but it enables people who've got a common interest in language to talk to people who are interested in the same language, share resources, share experiences, and provide support. So across Defence as a whole, huge amount of support for people who want to learn and use foreign languages.
Fantastic. Bernadette.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much indeed again, Martin, for your story and for your insights. I'm now going to introduce you, if I may, to George Wilson, who's joining us from Clermont-Ferrand, but he's normally based in Paris, a very beautiful place to be based in, from the British Council. And George is the academic manager for teacher training and bilingual education for the British Council. And he has particular interests in regional and minority languages. Just by way of context, George, I was going to say that we, at the moment in the UK, are responding to, which is great, the Council of Europe's recommendation, which was posted in February from Strasbourg, about the importance of plurilingual and intercultural education for democratic culture. So that's all languages. And I'm going to come straight to you to hear a little bit more about your interest in this and your research, if I may.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real passion of mine. I recently completed my MA at UCL, and I was going backwards and forwards between Paris and London. And my MA was in comparative education, and it was looking at, in particular, at regional language policy and how regional language policy varies between France and Britain in particular. And yeah, I think it kind of unveiled to me how important it was that we actually not only understand the value of these languages, but that we really take action to protect them.
Absolutely, very, very important indeed. And historically, there must be reasons why regional languages and minority languages have disappeared or are waning. Tell us more from your research.
Yes, there is. So, I mean, in Britain and France, we're lucky still to have a wide number of regional languages. Just to name well, in Britain, in the British Isles, we have 7. So we have Welsh, Cornish, Scottish Gaelic, Manx Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, Scots, Ulster Scots as well. Metropolitan France is even more. It has 28. So the ones that we all know, Breton, Gaelic, Breton, Corsican, Basque, etc. But there are also lesser known ones like Gallo or Occitan, etc. But what's really alarming, really, is that all of these languages are classified as endangered by UNESCO, with the exception of Welsh, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But yeah, there were very clear reasons why these languages declined. A lot of it was the rise at the end of the 18th century of this concept of the nation state. And a nation state involves unity, and unity was quite hard to come by at the time, if you think about the way in which our countries formed. So there was a real effort to impose a single national language, often, ironically, through universal education. So
absolutely. So that we can see the rise of English here and French here, can't we, in this context, replacing earlier Latin, which was, of course, the language of Pansofia, this idea of universal education. So there are good reasons for that, but obviously there are repercussions to that.
Absolutely. I think, well, there was one kind of memorandum that stuck in my mind that I saw in my research that was, it was an educational inspector from the 19th century who said clearly to teachers, your only purpose here is to kill the Breton language.
Oh, my goodness.
I know, but it kind of encapsulates the idea.
Changed.
We have, thank goodness. But it kind of encapsulates that there was this cycle of conscious effort to kind of eradicate these languages, both in the British Isles and in France and elsewhere. For example, you'd have teachers who would give what they called le symbole to a child, a block of wood or a slipper, and any child caught speaking their native tongue would be given this symbol, and the only way they could get rid of it was by denouncing someone else. Oh. So the person at the end of the day who had le symbole would be whipped or beaten.
Oh my goodness.
So, and you can see kind of the effect that has. It has the effect of undermining the language in people's estimation, that kind of downward cycle of prestige to the point where people don't want to transmit it to their children. It becomes a burden. And the result of that is quite, well, I mean, it's very clear actually that a vital language can move into a position of vulnerability and even extinction within one generation. It just takes one
Absolutely.
generation for people to stop
Absolutely.
transmitting it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, Wales can tell similar stories. I mean, I think we can go across the world really with
Yeah.
with the experiences of minority and regional languages. But obviously, you know, before the 16th century, most of the people in Wales spoke Welsh. I mean, that was the natural language of Wales. Of course, it was. But of course, Henry VIII put the end to that with his Act of Union when he then forbade Welsh to be used and insisted that English became the official language. So, you know, I'm sure we could have lots of stories across the world, but we're changing, and it clearly matters that we value all of our languages. And also that if a language disappears, it's the culture that disappears, it's the history, it's the social history, it's the identity, and that's really, really important. Is there anything legally that we can draw attention to?
Yes, so I mean, Britain is a signatory of the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, which sets out, there are different stages of the charter, and Britain's actually signed up to the second and third tier, where they guarantee giving education, giving language training through education, and giving through education through the languages themselves. So like you say, using them as the medium of education. And you can see that happening in Wales today to great success, in fact. Welsh is a language that is really coming back to life, and the figures are quite astounding.
Yes, they have an ambition, don't they, to promote Welsh and to deliver 1 million speakers, isn't it?
Yes, by 2050.
By 2050.
And what's really great is that there's a real conscious language plan for that. It's not just oratory. It's really an effort that's been thought through by some of the world's best language planners.
Yes, indeed, indeed. So it's not just making the policy, it's what you do to make the language live again, to revitalize. How can we revitalize languages, George? What do you think? What has your research told you?
Well, I think the most important thing, obviously, is intergenerational transmission. It's parents teaching and speaking to their children in that language. However, when that stops, and we've seen that that does stop, especially when there's low prestige attached to a language, it's very hard to get it going again. So what the best tool generally for reintroducing or supporting a language is immersion education. So that can be partial immersion, where part of the curriculum is taught through the language, or it can actually be full immersion, where the whole curriculum is taught through language, usually with the exception of foreign languages and English or French, etc. Now, as we said, the Welsh government's going all out with that, with their 2050 strategy. But it's not enough. You have to go a bit further as well. And again, Wales is a good example of this. You need the jobs, you need the reason to apply it outside of the school context. And ultimately, what you want is that there's people who learn it as a language through immersion education, go home and talk it within the pub, within their friends' circles, etc. So that's what's really needed to kind of get the intergenerational transmission going. But it is tricky because you have this situation where there's a lot of research actually showing that just because people are studying the language and can speak it, doesn't actually mean they're going to, that they're willing to. And sometimes the language you acquire through education is a bit more formal, it's a bit more academic. It's not actually the language you want to use when you're playing tennis or speaking it in the pub. So that's a whole challenge that's wrapped up with language planning as a whole, and not just education.
Exactly. So it's got to be a living language, living in the communities, living around us. And I think we're getting clear messages here that there is, of course, extraordinary value in having a language which is spoken worldwide, a global language. And we've heard the languages that we're being prioritized, but it's also important to keep other languages alive. So the answer clearly is a plurilingual future.
Yes.
It's being able to code switch, to be able to use languages in different contexts for different purposes. George, it's really fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think this is the moment to bring in our developmental linguist, Professor Antonella Siraci, to talk a little bit more about all the benefits of all of the languages that we have in our brains and in our repertoires. So thank you so much, George, and we'll hear from you later if we have time to pick up some more questions. And I'm just going to say, if I may, and do forgive my accent, everybody, if this is not correct, Diolch yn fawr, which means thank you in Welsh, and Trugares, which means thank you in Breton. I'm now going to go straight to Antonella Siraci, Professor Antonella Siraci, my friend and colleague, to talk to us a little bit about the cognitive, cultural and social benefits of language, the value of plurilingualism.
Thank you so much, Bernadette, and thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. I'm an experimental researcher. I'm a cognitive scientist. I'm also Italian, in case you're wondering, so I have some experience of language learning over my lifetime. I'm also involved in science communication, particularly communication of research on multilingualism to society. So I'm wearing my double hat, you know, in addressing the questions that we're talking about, so to speak. I'm talking both from the perspective of research on multilingualism, but also public engagement of research. So yes, I mean, many of the questions that we've been talking about concern obviously the role of languages, the potential effects of multilingualism in our conceptual understanding of the world, and whether multilingual societies may be healthier, more cohesive, more productive, and more secure. And so what does research show in this respect? Now, there is an obvious side, right? I mean, it's fairly obvious that languages are important for communication among people and cultures. But what is perhaps slightly less conventional are the connections that I'm going to draw between research on the bilingual brain and the importance of multilingualism for transversal skills, which can be applied in a variety of contexts outside the language domain itself, including diplomacy, intercultural communication, soft power, peacekeeping in the world. And I don't need to stress to you that in the UK, we have an urgent need to put languages at the core of education as a crucial skill. The problem has been made more acute by the unexpected changes in our lives caused by the pandemic, the abrupt changes in the geopolitical situation in the last 9 months. And so, you know, this has created a world where stability has become rare you know, inequalities have become deeper, and there may be even greater challenges for humanity. It's interesting that we recently collaborated with UNESCO in an important initiative that they call the Futures of Education, plural futures. And in their document, the phrase learning to become figure very prominently. And learning to become involves adaptability to change. I'd like to emphasize this concept because when I'm going to describe briefly, you know, the effects of bilingualism on the brain, I think, you know, this concept of adaptability, flexibility, adaptability to change is very, very important. So 3 arguments that are emerging from research. First, people who learn and use more than one language, and remember, any languages, not just the important ones, the economically prestigious ones. So this, the fact of having more than one language in the brain may lead to more flexibility in dealing with complex situations. And this means better focused attention, better ability to ignore irrelevant information, better ability to switch between tasks when the situation requires it, and the capacity to allocate attention in an efficient and adaptable way. And this comes, you know, partly from the experience of having to choose one language and exclude the other language or other languages, if we're talking about multilingualism, and switching from one language to the other. So this experience is one of the roots to adaptability to change, right, in a more general way, which again means flexibility to adapt to constantly changing situations, to quickly evaluate multiple and often conflicting sources of information. So this may come from multilingualism. Attention, you know, when people are overwhelmed by, you know, a volume of information, attention really becomes a scarce resource. And in this situation, multilingualism are potentially better at evaluating, prioritizing arguments, and this, you know, in turn, we can say, strengthens the ability to cooperate, negotiate, and compromise. Second argument, people who learn and use more than one language, again, let me stress, any languages, have a better understanding of other people's perspectives. Now, this is really very important. This comes from the experience of obviously having to choose the right language depending on the person that one talks to and depending on what, you know, one talks about. And it comes from the fact that bilinguals, particularly early bilinguals, are often bicultural. So adult bilinguals, for example, in many experiments have been found to be faster than monolinguals at moving from their own egocentric perspective to other people's perspective. Again, this shows mental flexibility and adaptability to change. And this could be a crucial element of cultural diplomacy because, you know, to the extent that this, you know, crucially depends on understanding the other person's perspective, you know, trying to attract and create a good impression. So multilingualism can enhance these capabilities. And to the extent that, I mean, I don't need to tell you, cultural relations are a matter of mutual understanding. So the ability to appreciate how others can see things from their point of view is a very powerful means to exercise, for exercising influence as well as attraction and for mediating conflict. Third and final argument, there is evidence from research that decision-making is affected in subtle ways by the language in which a problem is presented or discussed. So bilingual speakers may be better at controlling biases that are based on emotional reactions. In other words, they are potentially better at balancing rationality and emotionality in their decisions. So this is potentially very important implications in a world in which many people interact and make decisions in non-native languages. And again, you know, it suggests that, you know, monolingual Brits are not an advantage by the fact that they are native speakers of English. In many situations where they interact with a proficient second language, you know, non-native speakers of English. So what can we conclude? I mean, the multilingual brain potentially, and I mean potentially because these effects are not automatic, they depend on circumstances, but potentially the bilingual brain operates more effectively in terms of focusing, seeing more sides, both sides of an argument, flexibly adapting to changing circumstances. And these are all transversal skills that are useful in, you know, all the situations that we were talking about. And in case you're wondering, these effects are not just found in early bilinguals, so people who learn two languages from childhood, but they're also found in adult, you know, late bilinguals, because it's perfectly possible to learn a language to a very high level in many respects. And again, you know, these you don't need to be a perfect bilingual to show these effects, because the perfect bilingual, I have news for you, doesn't exist. So, you know, the relative proficiency in bilinguals always change, you know, from day to day or even from hour to hour, depending on who we're talking to, what we're talking about, and many other things. So we are hoping to be moving towards a world where, you know, bilingualism, multilingualism increases this adaptability to change, which is crucial for many of our activities. And so, you know, we are trying to make people aware that multilingualism is a resource, not only in terms of learning a language at school or languages at school, but also, as the colleague was saying before, all languages, regional minority languages, should be seen as a resource. And I have some experience in my life life because my mother was from Sardinia. Sardinian is a minority language in Italy, and my mother never spoke Sardinian to me because she didn't think it was useful. And now I'm now working with the Sardinian government to make sure that Sardinian is appreciated and introduced as a medium of instruction in schools. So the center I direct, Bilingualism Matters, really aims at bridging the gap between research and society, changing the perception of languages in society, and so that people in all sectors can make informed decisions, whether it's about their children, their students, their patients, their policies, and so on. And so we're doing this through a growing international network. At the moment, we have 31 partners in 3 continents. We're opening one in Australia pretty soon, so that will be continent number 4. So I'm at the end of what I wanted to say. So saying that languages can save lives is not just a rhetorical overstatement. It's an ambitious but realistic programmatic statement. But this requires all of us to cooperate in this common endeavor. And so I would say, let's keep the momentum going. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antonella. Thank you very much indeed. Such a rich input as ever. And quite right. We are not suggesting for a moment that learning other languages, being aware of other cultures automatically will solve the world's problems. It's not going to be the panacea, but it is a way forward. And when you think of how far we have come in terms of policy, in terms of practice, we still have a long, long way to go. But we are moving towards a recognition that whichever language you speak, whichever language through which you make sense of your world, it is important that that language is kept alive. It's important that we learn other languages and have the opportunity to learn other languages in instructed settings, in our primary education, in our secondary education, in our ongoing further education, in our professional lives at university. And there are all kinds of different routes to building and extending your repertoire of languages, of growing your understanding of others through cultural agility, cultural knowledge, cultural competence, and developing this range of transversal skills that Antonella has outlined. I'm not certain we have too much time for questions, but we might just be able to get a few in before we are cut off. John, is there anything which is urgent in our chat or QA from our audience? Thank you so much for staying with us, everybody.
I think mainly it's positive feedback, and in particular for what the last 3 speakers have said, the inspiration and the hope that brings. So I suppose just one question that I would ask Antonella is, from what point in someone's learning of languages would you start to see these benefits? Do you see it as progressive, a straight line, or something of a curve where the really strong benefits kick in at higher levels of fluency? Or are the benefits there at all stages of learning?
Well, obviously, we need, people mentioned immersion, right? I mean, obviously, languages need to be practiced and used, on a regular basis. So there are individual differences as well. So, it's not that one is either bilingual or not. One can be bilingual to different degrees. So now we are conceptualizing bilingualism as a continuum that ranges from minimally bilingual, just passive exposure, I don't have time to tell you, but passive exposure to multilingual communities can actually have effects on the brain. And so, ranging all the way from that level to very active command of both languages. Clearly, these effects are more likely to be seen in active multilinguals who, have the opportunity and the motivation to use their languages in their everyday life.
And just a word, to reinforce that, and some work that Bernadette and I have done around language level frameworks, and also to recognise that this is something that's very strong with the Ministry of Defence, with the STANAG standards for languages, the recognition that there are different levels and that each of those levels is useful. And also, if you understand where you are in that process, then it gives you the next steps to improve further and further. So getting on that ladder of languages is really important too. Bernadette.
Thank you so very much, John. So once again, I'm going to give the warmest thanks to our speakers and our panelists, to Professor Antonella Soraci, to Major Martin Beaver, to George Wilson, to John Warne, and to all of those who joined us from our UK intelligence agencies. And thank you for listening. Keep believing that languages and cultural understanding matter, because they do. And it's very much a question of us being the ambassadors, being the champions, showing by example that this is something that really can change and transform your lives. Thank you so much. I'm going to wish you the best of conferences. Please join all of these other excellent speakers and sessions that are being offered by the Language Show. Thank you very much to Jonathan Scott for his organisation. Farewell, and I hope to see you again.